interesting session, India Climate Summit saw distinguished panelists joining to understand the global carbon footprint, its present realities, as well as what sustainable solutions can be adapted.
As India's growth trajectory grows to multiple X, whatever that X could be, obviously a lot is being said that we are lowest per capita carbon consumption. And Ashish, I'll start with that segue. How do we see our carbon trajectory growing, right? Right now, obviously it's very low, but with this increase in economics, right? And we all know economic growth and carbon are very inextricably linked, right? They all go together. So how does India see its carbon pathway from that perspective, from a growth perspective?
Thanks. Thanks, Nitesh. No, it's an interesting question, and well, let me start by saying I'm delighted to be here. Lots of empty chairs, but of course, quality matters much more than quantity. So
a lot of online viewers.
No, all right, excellent. So delighted to be here. I think interesting question. If you had asked this question, say 15 years ago, I think the answer would have been obvious, right? That as you grow, you would actually emit a lot more. The Indian experience over the last 10 years clearly suggests that that's not the case. India has already been able to decouple its emissions with its growth pattern, right? So we've kind of, this relative emission intensity of GDP. India is able to kind of bend the curve already by reducing around 35 to 45% of its emission intensity while it is growing, right? So, and I think as you grow further, there are very many sort of opportunities. So those of you who've been here since the morning would know that there are enough and more technologies which are low carbon. Well, renewable energy is just one sort of prime example, but the entire transition to electric vehicles, the transition from sort of more high emission agriculture to climate resilient agriculture, there are many pathways for decoupling emissions from growth.
No, thank you, Ashish. Thanks for that perspective. So, Safi, shifting to you a little bit and shifting gears to a little bit on adaptation, right? Some would argue adaptation is more important to the country, disaster management, and I think Ashish talked about resilience. So maybe some view in terms of what the government is doing, what the thought process is at the moment on how adaptation measures are being looked at, and what are some of the initiatives that are being driven at the moment?
So it's great that you mentioned disasters as well. I didn't see disaster written at any one of those nice blocks over there. This is a very important impact of climate change. And India is seeing disasters in its highest ferocity. 2 sessions ago, you saw Dr. Ravichandran, the Secretary of Ministry of Earth Science. He mentioned how the Arctic ice change was impacting the Indian monsoon, especially the August-September part of it, and how the heavy rains in India were impacting the Arctic ice. And there is 20 years of study on this, which we are doing in Norway. So if you look at the rains that happened in Delhi today, so there were 235 millimeters in just 3 hours. So 235 millimeters, as per the IMD statistics, in 3 hours is a lot of rain, because the average for Delhi is known to be 600 mm. And all of that came in 3 hours.
Right.
So the term that was used by us in our local parlance is FDI. The frequency, the duration, and the intensity of these extreme events is changing.
It's the new FDI term we should add, because I know we've been used to some other FDI definition.
Exactly. So this too is the FDI of the disaster management community, of the climate adaptation community. And if you see what impact, what Dr. Ravichandran had said, the impact of rising seas, the impact of rise in sea surface temperature. So in 2023, sea surface temperature was the highest all through the year, compared to 1850s and 1860s.
Right.
And 2024 has not been left far behind. So if your sea surface temperature is rising, there will be more clouds, there will be more precipitation on land,
right.
There will be stronger cyclones, and you are seeing things like things that have not been actually decided that this is the reason for climate change, or what is the reason for this.
Yeah.
There is a certain set of scientists who feel that monsoon is also changing in its duration and intensity. He also mentioned a very good number, that the amount of rainfall for the entire country in monsoon has not changed.
Right.
However, the frequency
and the intensity,
duration,
the drought,
intensity
it's
is
a very
changing.
important nuance.
So this is the impact which we need to really talk about. Its impact on agriculture, on livelihood. You might start having a lot of extra rain in Rajasthan and Gujarat, and it might reduce in Assam and Uttarakhand and Himachal.
Yeah.
So these can have trends which can be really far-reaching. So a government is looking at these things in a very close way. The Ministry of Agriculture, the National Disaster Management Authority, there are various ministries, and a little piece comes out of every ministry. So NDMA comes from the disaster side, the Ministry of Environment comes from the climate side.
Yeah.
So all these groups combine and they work at things. So
no, that's great. That's great to know that there is coordinated response, data-led response, science-led, as you said. But if I were to click on it a little bit to say that, is there enough real-time alerts for people, right? For the citizens, wherever they could be, right? And as you said, data, science, I know ISRO, we were talking, is doing a lot of stuff. Could you talk a little bit about how this could be enhanced? How could we get more real-time alerts so that we can have a little bit of a proactive response as much as possible? Some of it we have to react, that is very, very clear. But is there a bit on it, and how can data and technology help?
So that's a very valid question, and this is, unfortunately, it is not very well known, but there was a mention in the 2 sessions before about the cyclone in Odisha in 1999. It was a super cyclone. It caused a lot of damage, life and property.
Yeah.
Immediately, the Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, and several other agencies got together, and over a period of time, they have built a system where for every single cyclone, when it starts off as a depression, like the recent cyclone Rimal started off as a depression off the coast of Chennai. And it was a depression, not very strong, but they were tracking it.
Right.
And then when the cyclone formed and it reached their supercomputer told them that this is now moving into a cyclone, they gave you a 7-day track. In 7 days, they gave you an advance warning that this is the line that the cyclone will follow. So that is the extent to which early warning has reached on that that's one single hazard of cyclones. So there is a lot to do. Because there are several more hazards, and there are several more hazards for which things have been developed. But the point about citizens, so there is something that NDMA has been working on and started, and it works successfully, is called the Common Alert Protocol. So it comes as an SMS on your phone. However, this will come only before the disaster. After the disaster, if your telecom communications go down, then there is a problem. So that is also what we are working on now.
Right.
And the cap is a pretty big thing. So if the cyclone is coming in this track, it's going to go through these 3 tehsils of Odisha. So all those people currently in those 3 tehsils in Odisha will get that SMS. It won't go to anybody else. Then just today, the minister inaugurated something called NDEM 5.0. So the National Disaster Emergency Management Protocol, it's a platform which is available to every individual. And it gives you all the possible alerts that are there. It's got GIS maps for every hazard. It's really well done.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. That's great to know. I didn't know some of it myself. Thank you for that. Ashish, turning back to you a little bit, I think you talked about net zero journey. India has 2070, Paris, we need to achieve a target. Some would say we are a little bit off, right? It's being discussed in COP every year. I think the new inventory also doesn't show very encouraging results. But coming to from an India standpoint, do you think we have a strong net zero pathway? How is that looking? And what other steps, in your view, we should be thinking about, and how can private sector also play a role in that?
Now, thanks for the question. I think it's very critical to start thinking about how do we sort of evaluate our journey to 2070? Or how do you start looking at different pathways to 2070? The pathway to 2070 is not going to be linear, right? That, okay, we do incremental change from one year to the other because, well, carbon stocks are embedded in stocks of capital, right? So you actually have a stock of building which is getting built now. That carbon stock is going to remain for the next 75, 100 years.
Right.
Similarly for infrastructure that you're building now.
Yeah.
So what you're doing now in terms of infrastructure choices, in terms of any capital stock, any kind of capital investment has to be thought of in terms of low carbon,
Yeah.
but at the same time climate, well, sort of risk resilient, because as we've already seen today, but also in the past, that you can't have infrastructure which is creaking at the margins, new infrastructure which is creaking at the margins while it is being built. So you will basically not be able to, you will actually have a double whammy.
Yeah.
You will invest in new infrastructure, and then climate risk, physical risk like extreme weather events will destroy that infrastructure. So you will actually have more embedded carbon in newer infrastructure that you're going to create. And I think that's why you need to think about integrated approaches between low carbon and climate resilient or resilient infrastructure. The government of India, and I think Safi can talk more about it, has this coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure as well, which is active all over the world. But the idea that we've been thinking about adaptation and mitigation pretty much in silos. And I think one of my asks is to start thinking much more integrated approaches for adaptation and mitigation. Now, buildings is one example, but then there are many others. Agriculture is another example.
Right.
You can actually do very good climate resilient agriculture. System of rice intensification for paddy, growing paddy, which reduces water consumption, which reduces emissions, but it is much more resilient to the changing climate, and it's very good for mitigation as well. Similarly, solar cold storage for farmers. We've done sort of solar cold storage for 5,000 women farmers in Bihar, and that is both adaptation and mitigation. Mangroves, growing mangroves in coastal areas is both adaptation and mitigation. It protects you against disasters, but it's a fantastic carbon sink as well. So you can monetize the reductions in carbon in adaptation projects as well, because there are co-benefits.
So with that, I think we're over time. We will pause here. Okay, thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.